Okay, welcome to today's discussion with Debra Taylor of the Taylor Financial Group and the leader of next month's Tax School for Advisors in Chicago on June 6th and the 7th. You can go ahead and learn more about the workshop and sign up at horsesmouth.com/tax school. That link is in the description beneath the player wherever you are watching. So today, Debbie will be discussing with Horse's Mouth Editor-in-Chief Sean Bailey the power of adding tax planning to an advisor's practice and how it can lead to some pretty substantial growth and client satisfaction. So without further ado, I'll hand things over to you, Sean.
Thanks, Doug. Welcome, everyone. Hello, Debbie. How you doing?
Great.
So Debbie, I think we were just talking before we went live about, about the advisor who's on the fence about tax planning. And so I'm wondering if you could speak for a minute or two about why an advisor who's on the fence about tax planning should probably, get off the fence and take some action, because there's going to be important things happening now in the short term and also in the long term that make, bringing the tax guidance skill set into an advisor's value proposition, so meaningful for clients and for advisors looking to grow their business.
Yeah. So for your existing clients, they are looking for tax planning. It helps with retention and it helps make them referable, which a lot of advisors overlook. But the number one way to grow your practice is through referrals from your existing clients. So for your existing clients, it's absolutely the right thing to do. They're wanting these services. Data shows that they will change advisors if they're not getting this, and it helps to make them referable, which is probably the best way to grow your business. So that's that part of it. Then the second part is going on offense or growing your business through new clients. And I am finding that the best way to attract higher net worth clients and to close them and to protect my fees and to beat out others in a competitive environment is offering this tax planning, which, folks, if they don't realize they want it up front, once you explain to them how it can benefit them, they are very interested and will choose us over others. And then I'll say one other thing is the wallet share. Is in order to do this work, you need to have all of their assets with you. And so it's a totally different way of thinking, because in the past, they'd be like, oh, well, I'll give you $1 million and I'll give $1 million to Joe down the street. Now you're like, yeah, I need that $1 million from Joe down the street, because in order to do this work, it's basically putting together a puzzle. And I need all these assets here so that in real time, I see what's going on and can make the best recommendations to you. And so it helps you increase wallet share, either with those existing clients and with those future clients.
Right. Yesterday in a separate venue, we were discussing this concept of the lifetime tax bill for clients. And it's, we've been discussing this topic of advisors and taxes since 2017. And, there were times in this business where advisors gave actually very little thought to this whole thing. But anyway, one of the key things in our conversation starting in 2017 was the idea that people tend to have a tax accountant. Tax accountant tends to be, acts as a historian, just looking at what happened last year and then simply trying to implement, whatever possible actions they can take to keep this year's tax bill as low as possible. But really, they're sort of operating with blinders, because there's really some important things to be considered when one looks at the lifetime tax bill going forward of your clients. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this is like a concept that I'm really building out in sort of my head and now starting to talk about it. And I am going to probably write an article on it this weekend. But this lifetime tax bill has been it's not really discussed. And so, folks come into retirement and they're like, yeah, I need to make sure that you write down there that I need a new car every 7 years. And oh, by the way, I do want to take a family trip. So can you add $10,000 on a year, right? Like that's the stuff that people talk about. Meanwhile, no one's talking about the lifetime tax bill. And I'll give you an example because I ran some numbers on this because I am, again, like building out this concept.
Right.
So this is real clients of ours. We just ran this number yesterday, so I have this, is when adding up for them, and they are like in their late 60s, early 70s, their total income taxes paid would be close to $2 million over the next like 20 to 25 years. Like
That's
these are big numbers, right?
Right.
So, everybody's worried about the grocery store, and don't get me wrong, that's a thorn in my side too, okay? And the price of pizza or whatever going up from $12 to $14, and all of that bothers me. Do not misunderstand for a second. But while we're focusing on all these details, and these like day-to-day inconveniences, and maybe that's the issue, Sean, right? As you and I think this through out loud, right? Is because this stuff is facing us day in and day out, right? You go to the food store, your bill's 150, and a year ago it was 120, right? That feels so real. So then when you're talking about, oh, what's on your mind? What are you concerned about? You're like, oh, like inflation or whatever. But nobody's facing you with the lifetime tax bill, right? Like nobody presented you that future receipt to say, oh, by the way, it's going to be $2 million over the next 20 years. Because I think if we did that, then people would add that to the top of their concerns also. But that's not what they're dealing with. They're going to a gas pump, or they're trying to buy a car, or they're trying to buy food, or go to a restaurant. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is so expensive. We need to address this. But what's hiding is this lifetime tax bill of literally hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars for people. And that needs to be addressed because those are the big stakes.
Right. So I shouldn't ask you a question that we haven't discussed earlier, or that I, don't know the answer to, but I will, because it will be educational for all of us. But so based on us having this conversation, a natural question would be, so how does one estimate a client's lifetime tax bill from this moment in time, going forward, picking X number of years of longevity?
Yeah, and it's a great question. And by the way, that's a maxim for all the attorneys is, right, never ask a
Right.
question you don't know the answer to. But and again, that's part of the challenge we have is that I'm making you know this. The software has been so focused on accumulation that there's all these tools designed to analyze the accumulation phase, but very few tools to analyze the distribution phase, which would be that lifetime tax bill. So in order to do it with the two most popular software, which is eMoney and MoneyGuide Pro, right? In order to do it, you basically have to go in and it will show you, oh, at age 67, here's what taxes look like. At age 68, here's what taxes look like. So those numbers are in the software, line by line.
Mm-hmm.
And you basically need to go then and add those numbers up and be like, oh, well, when I add up these 20 years, it now is $2 million.
Yeah. Wow. So, but getting back to the advisor who's on the fence about bringing this on, I think when we're introducing new things to really, in any situation, not just for advisors, where you're trying to teach people something, you're trying to lead them somewhere, it's often good to give them, a sort of small stakes, doable action where they can, try out this approach. And so when it comes to advisors deciding, okay, I'm going to finally do this, what are you going to cover in the workshop that they'd be able to go home and start to implement as a low stakes dry run or test run kind of first phase implementation of talking to the clients about implementing, better tax guidance with them?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the first step is coming to the 2-day workshop in Chicago because we're going to cover the things that they need to be thinking about doing, how to communicate with clients on it, the checklist, like all of that. So I think that's the educational foundation. But you're like, okay, in their office, what would they do? Well, the first thing is you need to collect tax returns. So you got to create a process around that and get your head around that part of your job is reviewing these tax returns and giving some guidance to clients on that. And so I think that's the first step. And then part of that is having the software to do that, which in many instances would be Holistiplan to help you do that work.
Right, right. And so do you recommend that they just roll this out to all their clients, or should they pick just, how should they test run it?
Yeah, I mean, if you're starting from scratch, then I do think you have to build incrementally because it could feel too overwhelming for you and the team. And so I think then what you do is you've got to get the software. I think you need to build some processes around that. Like, what are we going to actually do? How are we going to get the tax return? And then who are we going to do this work for? And so for some people, they start and they say, okay, like this year, we're just going to do this for 30 people. And maybe you pick your 30 favorite clients that are friendly clients that will work with you in the beta stage, right? So that could be a way that you approach it. And they're friendly and you can work out some of the kinks, maybe have them give you feedback, send them a survey afterwards. So that's certainly a way to do it. Another way to do it is maybe you pick out 5 clients from each level, 5A, 5B, 5C, 5D, right? It might be hard to start with all the A's, right? That might feel overwhelming. But it might be helpful to spread that out only because you're going to see different needs, different levels of service at those different tiers. So those are 2 ways to start. Having said that, let's not forget that the point of software is to be able to do things en masse efficiently. So in the old days, you would say, well, we do review tax returns here. We review them in response to a question like, oh, I'm going to get married, right? Can you look at my tax return and give me an idea about what my tax savings could be, right? So a lot of times it was very reactive where you would collect the tax return because that looks good. You'd put it in the file and then something may come up and it would be, again, very reactive. You'd pull it out and you'd be like, oh yeah, I think you could save like $8,000. I don't really know for sure, but it looks like that, right? And so the point of the software though, is that you could literally collect 100 tax returns, upload them to the software. It literally takes 30 to 40 seconds and you would have a tax report for all 100 of those clients, literally like that. So with the technology then, like some of the things that would hold us back in the past, because you're like, okay, I'm only one person and I'd have to review this tax return. That will take me 30 minutes. And it's not like that anymore. You upload it to the software and then you have a report and you could then have your intern send that out to 100 clients. So part of it depends on your practice, your comfort level, your bandwidth. But early on, I had my intern doing this work.
Yeah, right, right. And I mean, that's real value you're suddenly adding to your value proposition is really walking the walk, as they say, if you're suddenly checking in with your clients and saying, hey, this looks like you might be able to save $8,000 in taxes. I mean, that is a very powerful thing because those are real dollars that, you can do the math on, you can show them. It's not unlike, a variety of other things. Showing people, how much they can collect of Social Security if they delay a year or 4 years or whatever the case may be. These are sort of meaningful, concrete, eye-catching, sometimes jaw-dropping experiences that one can have with your client. So moving on to a couple other topics before we wrap up, I'm wondering, we've been in someone's going to be at the workshop. All right, so we do this, we have these, we run these analyses. We talk a lot about Roth conversions and stuff. And I think these, Holistiplan tax reports can point out opportunities on that front. So you can just talk a little bit about, how you'll be covering Roth conversions in the context of the workshop?
Yeah, so we're big believers that the Roth conversions can be a great tool to drive down the lifetime tax bill, right back to that. And so we're going to talk about them within the context of how to run scenarios demonstrating Roth conversions for people, right? Because maybe it's 50, maybe it's 100, and then what that looks like, what the tax bill could be this year, and what their future tax savings could be if they do a $50,000 Roth conversion, each year for the next 4 years. So we're going to talk about how to think about it, how to run that analysis so that you can make optimal recommendations, and then how to communicate with the client what that would cost them this year, but what could save them during their life.
Right. Yeah. So, so the only thing I want to touch on is this whole tax planning world. Obviously received a major boost with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. Now, we've been operating under that law for quite a while now, but it is set to expire at the end of 2025. And here we are halfway through 2024. So I know there'll be some discussion about this. Why is that so important that advisors start to be thinking about this now? It's 18 months away, and we don't even know whether in fact it will happen. It could expire, it might not, but can you put that in the context of the workshop and why it's so important for people to start getting up to speed on this now?
Yeah, because when the TCJA was passed at the end of 2017, we were all like, yeah, it's driving down taxes for almost everybody, right? Like almost everybody wins. And it drove down income taxes and estate taxes. And so we're like, yeah, 2025 sunset, that's like a decade away. Well, 2025 is a year and a half away. And the TCJA will sunset unless Congress takes action. And if it's allowed to sunset, then taxes could very well go up for many people. And even if taxes don't go up for certain people, particularly those in the lower income ranges, the structure is going to change, right? So we all forget about that because we've been living with this same regime for 7 years now. But if you remember before, the standard deduction was half of what it is now. So now 90% of the people take the standard deduction because it's doubled. Well, if when it sunsets, then our standard deduction could get cut in half again. I don't know what happens to that SALT limitation of $10,000, right? There's a lot of stuff that the TCJA changed on us that we need to be prepared for it to either go back to the way it was or some compromise, or it continuing this way, and then we plan around that. So there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of things that we're going to need to be following. And then also the lifetime exclusion of $13.6 million a person. What's going to happen to the lifetime exclusion? Because that also doubled in 2017. So there's a lot of moving parts here that people, I think, need to have their eyes open. And by the way, clients are hearing about this and they're reading about this. So don't think that this is going to fly under the radar. You have our 2 presidential candidates, and they are out there every week talking about their views of our tax system. Make no mistake. I mean, this week they were talking about it. Last week they were talking about it. So there's a lot of conversation here, and you need to come into this next year and a half, being able to really coach these clients.
Yeah. And of course, even beyond them, because whatever happens, it's not going to be clean. It's not going to be as it is now or the way it was then. Like you said, all this stuff is going to, each one of these is going to be a bargaining chip. And, the kind of sausage that we're going to get at the end is, going to be different from what we got now. That's for sure. Right.
I mean, it's amazing. I have the original tax forms hanging in my office from 1913. And the original tax forms are 2 pages long. So it fits in a regular frame. Okay. It fits in a regular frame. It's 2 pages. And it's amazing when you read it because the TCJA overturned items in those tax forms that were literally there for over 100 years. And the TCJA came in, it's like, nope, we're not going to do that anymore. And so once that happens, you realize this stuff is not set in stone. And like you say, everything's a bargaining chip. So who knows what we're going to end up with?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think one thing that's clear is that, there's been a lot of energy and excitement around this topic for, the last 5-7 years, and it's just going to keep going. There's no sign of this fading at all. Partly because this thing was built in, right? The expiration was built in. If it hadn't been built in, well, who knows? But so, all right, Debbie. Well, thanks so much. And everybody, Debbie's going to be in Chicago, June 6th and 7th. Doug, you get a link to the workshop out there for everyone. And they also can go to horsesmouth.com/events and get signed up for the Chicago workshop. Debbie, great seeing you again. Thanks so much. And everybody, have a great weekend. Talk to you later.